bem. Małam? Serdecznie wysamy.
Lodaski.
Witamy serdecznie, zobaczyliście połamiecie.
Modification to this custom. Thank you. Thank you very much for your...
I'll go with it.
Awesome. Present one of our state legislators, Mr. and Mrs. Leonard Rocher. Two of our wonderful young ladies.
I visited Poland 2 years ago and just loved it. Wonderful.
One of our very active ladies in our pastor council, Teresa Kozlowski.
Okay, let's back up and make room for somebody else now.
Oh, he loves it. I told him that I was in course. He learned to relate your Come on, people. He wants us to go again. He wants us to come again.
Please go to the church. People come to the church. Do kościoła wszyscy, do kościoła.
I'm glad I'm real close.
Cardeal, evidence.
Just before
120 years. And our university branch in Krakow, our young people are just overwhelmed with it. It's a beautiful. Mr. Gehrig was able to help me get the housing initially. It just happened to be right. How you coming?
I do help my Polish.
Well, you and I think we'll be in the same ball game there. We're so pleased there.
and I'm married to Father, on your drive, like some water or some punch?
Mother.
what have been your impressions? First of all, you've been to America before. What are your impressions of America today and this area of the country?
My impressions of today are very special. For the first time, I come to a farmer land. Before I was only in the cities. I didn't know the green America. Now this green American farms, that is for me something very impressionable. In general, my coming to the United States that is caused by the Eucharistic Congress of Philadelphia this year. I am not only myself here by public delegation of Polish Muslims. About 17 Polish bishops in Philadelphia for this.
What is the status of the Catholic Church? You gotta hold it down at the feet.
Polish Poland is before, above all, a Catholic. A Catholic governed by communists. That is a deep distinction. And we must always observe this essential distinction for the Polish people, the Polish nation is Catholic 90%.
What kind of restrictions are put on the people there? Is it different than here in this country?
What is this ridiculous? Or you don't know the situation, the political situation in Europe.
Well, what is something different?
You must study that. That is not to me to give the answer you. It is your duty to understand the situation.
It is difficult.
The historical situation, the political situation of the world, our country is necessary to know that. But it is above all a Catholic country. Poland is Polish people, is Catholic during 1,000 years, the millennium, and remains Catholic also in this new situation created by the last World War. And the church in Poland is deeply connected with the nation.
But not with the government.
But government is government. And the people is the people. And the church is living in the people, not the government.
What is behind Cardinal Wyszynski's?
Cardinal Wyszynski is always the primary figure. You know him, of course. And now I heard that it is here published about his resignation. Of course, former is so, for he has 75 years. But he must remain for also his quite strong. He can accomplish his duty in the future also. And all Polish Episcopal Church presented to the Holy See petition for
We hear that there's a resurgence of religion in Russia itself. Is that true, do you think?
What is that in Russia?
Yeah.
But I don't know what is the situation in Russia. I suppose that the Russian is also religious. Of course, it is a difference for Polish people is Catholic, and the Russian people is Orthodox. It's a difference of religious tradition and also of the church facade is the government
Autocracy.
of Russia was always there. It was so till the revolutions beginning of this century. Now, of course, the situation is different. But for Poland, you must understand, you must conserve this constatation that the Church is living in the nation. That is the essential connection. And that is the support of our religion, of our church, and of each church organization, institutions, seminaries, priests, universities.
Cardinal, this country has experienced somewhat of a decline in the church-going numbers. Is that a problem in Poland also?
No, I cannot say that it is quite out our country, but it seems to me, it is my conviction that this process, which now is so spread in so many societies, countries, Western countries especially, is not so strong.
What do you think some of the things that should be done in the church to reverse that?
I don't know. I am not living here, but I suppose that a good, a very engaged pastoral work could give something, some efforts. Of course, it is also a process of civilization, modern civilization, secularization. Contemporary societies comes from the process of civilization. Outgrows the traditional schedules of human life. And that is true. But it's necessary that the apostolate is the master of the church. Yes, it depends. Yes. In advance, yes, the life, the contemporary life of the societies. And it seems to me that in American society, the religious situation is perhaps better as in so much Western Europe societies. It seems to me, not. It is my supposition, opinion, but too, I didn't do the studies in this domain. Yes. In our country, this is another situation. For in our country, this is ideological opposition between God, not God, the gospel, not gospel, church, belief, faith, and ethics. This opposition creates also strengthens also Catholic in their position.
Is there any relief
from the harassment of the government when it comes to building churches and repairing churches?
No, that is, it is a big problem now in our country, especially the building of the churches. New sections, cities, industrial sections, that is a very important problem. And it is not so easy to get a permission for this building. But if we get the permissions, that is always the attitude of the people, of the believers, of the working people, who is capable, who is able to go also to the offices without demand.
So there is harassment.
That is very important. And that is also a argument that the church is living in the people, in the nation. This is the fundamental reason, this is the fundamental connection. The people and the church.
You're saying that the people force the government to give the permission. Is that
not only that. If the situation of the church in Poland is as it is now, it is all a proof of the attitude of the people.
Your Eminence, only one question, gentlemen, only one question still. If you have a question.
That is a special experience. The building. I saw a building, but all this
the whole situation in Poland.
This connection. I hope that this connection is fundamental also in the side of the gospel.
Yes.
Our Lord said, go and teach all the people, all the nations. All nations. Even all nations. It is our mission.
Oh, yeah. I'm a brother.
I'm going to have to hold it like this now. Right there. That's it. 1, 2. Hold it down here. Testing 1, 2, 3. Well, I can hear you. I can almost hear you.
Quite a lot. First of all, it is representative of the Polish nation, no matter what would be his ideology or religion of this time. And therefore, Poles enjoy very much the same. He is from Krakow. It means he represents the whole perspective of Polish history, 1,000 years old. And unfortunately, the Polish heritage in this country is not this perspective. It is based on the limited experience of the people who came to this country in difficult conditions. They achieved quite a lot, and they are now interested in deepening their self-defining and self-definition and their knowledge of their roots, and therefore they are interested in knowing this part of this American Polish heritage. The third problem is that, of course, it is the only visit of this group of bishops who came to this country recently with the rural population. And then we have, of course, a program in Krakow, and this program will be more meaningful. Then we have, of course, here in Wisconsin, about 40 graduates of higher education in Poland who spent 1 year or less in this section of the country learning American methods of farming. And they also will return to Poland with this conviction that the interest of the American people is, of course, broader and includes all aspects of the life. And therefore, it is a very fine occurrence.
Isolated.
But certainly you are welcome then to ask anybody of us.
Go then to Boston from here.
thank you. But your eminence, I do not know, this is just kind of
You're going to have to...
Mary Jane.
God, we ask thy blessing upon this crowd, upon this gathering. Bless us in this food that we are to consume from thy goodness and bounty. Panie Boże, błogosław nas, te dary, które swojej dobrotliwości spożywać mamy, w imię Ojca i Syna i Ducha Świętego. Amen.
Your Eminence, Your Excellency, Right Reverend Fathers, venerated sisters, honorable papal knights, and Knights of Columbus, distinguished guests at the head table, members and friends of our organization, ladies and gentlemen. I am happy and proud that I can extend my warmest welcome to all of you on behalf of Annual Lectures on Poland. Your support of today's program appears to be great, and nothing can be done without the support of the whole community. Therefore, I thank you for this splendid support. We are happy and proud and honored that we have His Eminence, Cardinal Karol Wojtyla, among us as our most distinguished guest. Although his generous acceptance of our invitation has become his generous gift for this region, there is strong justification for his decision. How fitting to formally initiate our organization approximately 12 miles from our banquet hall, where the Poles first settled in the Polonia area in 1957. Polonia, as you know, is the second oldest Polish settlement in the United States. Panna Maria, Texas, was the first settlement. Descendants of the first settlement at Panna Maria, known as the Kielbasa family, settled in the Russell area, where now we have the site of the beautiful Wisconsin Lions Camp at Russelt. And at that place, there is a lake known formerly as Kielbasa Lake. We fully realize that we welcome in person of our eminent guest, an outstanding member of the Supreme Board of the Catholic Church, the College of Cardinals, for whom the faith is the supreme motivation. But we also realize that Cardinal Karol Wojtyla is an illustrious representative of this valiant Polish nation, the nation of our forefathers, of many of us, the nation which has existed for over 1,000 years as a member of the Christian Europe, often as a strong threshold of Christianity. While honoring him, among us, we pay tribute to the whole delegation of Polish bishops who have come from Poland to this country, the Eucharistic Congress, and are visiting with Americans of Polish origin and with other people of this country. We pay tribute to the whole Polish nation, which is so splendidly working and fighting for the preservation of its own way of life, its heritage, and its historical values of its Western culture, which has achieved so much in rebuilding that nation from destruction and ruins of the last World War. We pay tribute to Cardinal Stefan Wyszynski, Primate of Poland, and a great spiritual leader of the Church in Poland. His closest collaborator has been His Eminence Cardinal Wojtyla, the second oldest Polish cardinal, the oldest in office, and the youngest in his age. May he live to be 100 years. We welcome our eminent guest in central Wisconsin, and we join all other centers of Americans of Polish origin who voice their concern for Poland. We, Americans of Polish origin, and this entire country of ours, the United States of America, are sensitive to what is going on in Poland. This country of ours, and particularly Americans of Polish origin, never turn back to that country which has been fighting for its freedom on the confines of the Christian civilization for over 1,000 years. We are conscious that the Polish nation is living under the regime of one party without opposition, and we are extremely sensitive to anything that jeopardizes traditional values and the own way of life in Poland. Finally, we are proud to officially inaugurate annual lectures on Poland. There is a need for more knowledge on all aspects of Poland. This is a need not only for Americans of Polish origin, but first of all, for all other Americans and the whole society of the United States. The rich heritage of over 10 million people in this country is a necessary ingredient in the American heritage. As a member of the annual lectures in Poland, it is my sincere hope in this bicentennial year to bring to Stevens Point in the future outstanding scholars whose lectures will be recorded for later use at any university, high school, grade school, and for the reading public. It is my highest hope to attain this goal through unending work and ardent prayer. For without work and prayer, nothing that exists can succeed. Now I should like to introduce to you our Master of Ceremonies. He was born, raised, and educated in this region. His forefathers came to this country from Poland in the 1870s. Presently, he is a high school teacher at Rosselt, teaching English and French languages. He has shown outstanding ability and devotion in many parish activities at St. Peter's Parish in Stevens Point. At this time, I'd like to present to you Mr. Roy Shafransky.
Most often we do have trouble with speaking systems in a hall of this type. Can all of you hear me okay back there? Okay, good. Mary Jane, thank you so much for that beautiful and flattering introduction. It's like the $1,000 a man paid for a very rare dog, which was part schnauzer and part bull. A friend then asked him, what part was schnauzer and what part was bull? And he answered, the part about the $1,000 of which he paid for the dog. Be that as it may, Mary Jane was busy finding some biographical information about my family, which I didn't think she knew. But granted, I think we can all take pride in the heritage that we have to come together this evening to celebrate this great occasion in the presence of Cardinal Wojtyla. And at this time, we will make introductions at the head table. And we will start from the center and working to your left. We have, of course, our eminent guest and speaker for this program, the leader of the Roman Catholic Church in Poland, His Eminence Cardinal Karol Wojtyla. Next, we have Mr. Maynard Zdrojk, who is a member of the annual lectures on Poland and who happens to be the distinguished spouse of our president. And Maynard's profession in life is a farmer, and he's the only farmer I know of that if he intends to loaf, he gets up on time to get an early start. Maynard. Next in line we have our beloved and friendly Bishop of the Diocese of La Crosse, Bishop Frederick Frecking. Next, of course, in line we have Mrs. Mary Jane Zdrojk, the president of the annual Lectures on Poland series. She is not only the wife of a farmer, but she is also a mother, a teacher, also in home economics, and a host of other involvements in the Portage County area. Mary Jane. Next we have Mr. John Jonas and his wife Marion, who John happens to be the chairman of the board of Century Insurance. Mr. and Mrs. Jonas. Next in line we have Father John Novak, who is the Portage County Dean of Priests, as well as the pastor of St. Adalbert's Parish in Rosholt. Father John. Next we have Mrs. and Mr. Gerald Skalski. Gerald is one of the grand marshals of this event. He is a member of St. Stanislaus Parish, and very much involved in community activities in the area. Mr. and Mrs. Skalski. Working now to the right of Cardinal Wojtyla, we have the Chancellor of our university here at Stevens Point and his wife, Joyce. And if people don't remember the Chancellor's name, they remember his red vest. Chancellor and Mr. Draper. Next, we have a professor at Orchard Lake Seminary and College from Orchard Lake, Michigan, Monsignor Mieczysław Peszkowski. Monsignor. Our next two distinguished guests are Mayor Fiegelson and his wife Claire. Next we have Father Stephen Mieczkowski, who is the senior ranking member of the clergy here in Portage County, also a chaplain of over 25 years of service with the American Legion. Father Mieczkowski. Last but not least, we have a representative from the Felician Sisters, Sister Poncia, who is the principal of Sacred Heart School in Polonia, the first birthplace of Polish heritage in Portage County. Sister Poncia. At this time, then, to keep the program going, it is appropriate that we call on Dr. Lee Sherman Dreyfus to give the welcome address here from the university and whose facilities we are taking share in. Dr. Dreyfus.
I wish to welcome you all, and in looking over the titles, Your Eminence, Your Excellence, Your Honor, and I got thinking about Joyce, so I suppose your grandmotherliness. Serdecznie witamy. Your Eminence, you are most welcome, and certainly the most eminent citizen from Krakow to Stevens Point. In fact, with your presence and your color, you give added meaning now to my vest. But there are three special significances to your presence here tonight. First, the founding of this community, dated 1858, is also the year in which Kozichkovsky arrived in central Wisconsin and began the Polish community, essentially Kashub people who are here and are the basic strength of what this community is all about. I would also say that, again, we have a problem. I don't know how we do this at the university, but since potato is such a basic part of the economy of central Wisconsin, here we have another evening meal without a potato on the plate. And if I know the Okres and Louis Wysocki and the Zdroiks, this is going to cost me. A second significance and reason for welcoming you, Your Eminence, is our own branch of this university at Krakow, at the Jagiellonian University. We hope that you can carry our regards back to Rector Karash, and our students are on their way for the second year at the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point branch at Jagiellonian in Krakow. And the third special significance is this bicentennial year, 200 years of a free, loving society. And clearly, Poland stands out as the beacon of people who have sought and striven for freedom in that part of the world, as no other people around them have done in any sense. And as you lent to us General Kosciuszko, who did return to help establish freedom and democracy in the late 18th century, though it was only 5 years in length. But you left here on our soil in Savannah, Georgia, a young Polish Count, Kazimierz Pulaski, who also helped to bring about the freedom that are enjoyed by all the people in this room tonight, and a freedom which is not enjoyed in most parts of the world. And so on our 200th anniversary, what all of us as Americans derive from those Polish Americans who helped in the beginning and are now numbering approximately 5% of all Americans with some blood flowing in their veins of Polish heritage. And the university would like to have you carry our seal with you, and I shall bring it to you. But it is a very small exchange, this seal of the university, to give you in return for your great gift to us tonight, the gift of your presence.
Thank you, Dr. Dreyfus, for your enlightening remarks and your concern for the opportunities for students from this university to have a second home, at least for a semester, in Krakow. Our second welcome address is delivered by Dr. Arthur L. Herman, who here at the university is Professor of Philosophy and Acting Chairman of the Department of Philosophy. Dr. Herman.
Your Eminence, ladies and gentlemen, and friends of Poland, speakers of Polish and speakers of English, I've reminded standing outside the banquet room this evening just how many different kinds of languages there are that bind people together in a situation like this. And I suppose one could say that Cardinal's presence here is one more indication of just how strong those rather encouragements are that tend to bring people together more and more. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome a fellow colleague, since His Eminence teaches moral theology and social philosophy, to this university. Strong ties have existed between Polish and non-Polish philosophers, as those of you who know the works of Jan Łukasiewicz and Alfred Tarski can well attest. Two of Poland's greatest philosophers, in my estimation, have indeed been Łukasiewicz and Tarski. So officially, Your Eminence, may I extend to you the greetings and felicitations of the Philosophy Department, this university, and I hope your stay in our city and at our university will be a pleasant one. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Herman. Along with the introductions to the head table, we have in the audience, I think, a countless number of people who could stand up and be recognized. I happen to have a listing of only a few that I was requested to have people stand after I call their names. And again, this is always the difficult part of the program because so many people go working on in the background, and unfortunately everybody cannot be mentioned, and I hope you beg our indulgence on this, that there will be parts in the program later on for other extensions of thanks to all those who made this gathering possible. Mr. Skalski was introduced as the Grand Marshal of this affair, and he was assisted by David Shafransky. I guess I know him. David and Chet Brileski, Judge Robert Jenkins, and these are just a few of others who have helped us along. Again, in the audience, we have Mrs. and Dr. Elwyn Sigmund. Are you somewhere where you can raise your hand, at least so the people can see you? Okay, way to your left. All right, and then a former professor here at the university who now happens to be a president of a college in New York, Dr. Kurt Schmeller and his wife Beata. Are they? Okay, fine. And we have the members of the Knights of Columbus, those who are here, Mr. and Mrs. John Sullivan. John, I believe, is president of the Sarah Club and who has given this organization great backing. Very good. And we have Assemblyman Leonard Groshek and his wife, Mrs. Groshek. We have Mrs. and Dr. Burdett Egan, Dean and our very good friend, who has shown outstanding ability in his office. Dr. and Mrs. Egan. The next person has a very great association with the annual lecture in Poland, or on Poland series. The person who is in charge of seeing that our students at the university get to their out-of-country campuses, Dr. Pauline Isaacson, Director of Foreign Programs for our student in Krakow, our students. Dr. Isaacson. We have Mrs. and Judge James H. Levi. Judge Levi is a papal knight of the Holy Sepulchre. And we also have Mr. Carl N. Jacobs, Honorable Knight of Malta. This is, in some cases, a religious gathering. And it's always amazing to look in the audience to find out how many children there are. Of course, in a fair like this, I suppose, isn't conducive to children coming, but we're all familiar with their plights of education in the religious world, if they belong to a CCD class or if they go to a Catholic day school sponsored by the church. But children are rather apprehensive, and they look up to their elders as models by which to follow. It happened one Sunday. A wealthy man had taken his young son to church. The topic of the sermon was, "What is heaven like?" The priest went on to say, "Some people think that heaven is a fancy car and 2 television sets, that is, 2 color television sets." The boy sheepishly nudged his father and said, "Gee, Dad, we made it." At a dinner, also, President Dreyfus made the comment about not having potatoes on the menu. Parents, too, are rather fussy about the manners that their children have. And this is the story of a lady who was teaching her children manners so they know how to behave in public. And the preliminary instructions began at home. And as the mother was trying to get the ketchup out of the bottle to put the finishing touches on a sandwich, her little son, Mark, heard the doorbell ring, and he ran to answer the door. As he did, he opened the door, and the stranger said, "Is your mommy home?" "Yes," he replied. "She's in the kitchen hitting the bottle." We have next on our program a man who has done a great deal of promotion, involvement in the successful realization of this affair we're having today. He, by the way, is mentioned, if you haven't read it, those of you in the area, tonight's Point Journal gives a beautiful editorial on Cardinal Wojtyla's visit, and several notable people are mentioned in that editorial. So I think this is really a feather in the cap of this organization. Dr. Wacław Soroka and Olenka, would you give them a round of applause, please, at this time for their fine work? Dr. Soroka is a professor of history here at the university. Dr. Soroka.
Mr. Master of Ceremonies, Your Eminence, Your Excellency, the most reverend and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The best introduction is the shortest one, particularly when somebody to be introduced is so distinguished and worldwide known. And yet, it would be a grave omission and a serious loss of opportunity if we would not concentrate for a brief period of time on those aspects of the occasion and of the life and accomplishments of our distinguished and eminent guest, which might deepen our perspectives projecting on our daily life. And the first statement in this respect would be that we host His Eminence Cardinal Karol Wojtyla, Archbishop of Krakow. Krakow, the capital of Poland up to the end of the 16th century. The seat of one of the oldest universities in Eastern and Central Europe, from 1364. Krakow, the seat of famous centers of thought, political and ideological, where president of the university was Stanisław ze Skalmierza, or Pavel Wlodkowicz, who suggested in the conflicts of the time between the people who wanted to spread Christianity by force, by sword and fire, and between those who wanted to spread Christianity by charity. They stood clearly on the side of charity, and they represented this type of movement and thought which animated this nation for centuries. We, of course, see a representative of this nation which provides us with enormous resources for enrichment of our own Polish-American heritage. We necessarily have to state that Americans of Polish origin are at some disadvantage in providing their values as an element of the growing civilization of the United States. Most of them came to this country without proper education. Most of them did not carry with them knowledge and a possibility to spread this knowledge among the people of this country. Most of them came to this country 100 years ago hardly with anything they had, the cross and perhaps the prayer book, and then the determination to dig stones and to build this civilization. And unfortunately, still, in the process of developing this country has not accepted fully this heritage which is represented by the people of this country of Polish origin, if we look at this heritage from the historical perspective. Fortunately, this country, which is intensively developing, is now in the period of search for identification, ethnic and national identification. And we definitely can realize that on one side we have, of course, this long-lasting, 1,000 years lasting heritage, national heritage, which should be known to us, and not only known to us, but also incorporated in textbooks, in materials which are used in educative process. And on another side, we have this heritage of 100 years, this heritage which we admired today, which added quite a lot to the civilization of this region, and which added quite a lot to the civilization of this country as well. And while welcoming, and while just thinking a moment in this introduction of our distinguished speaker, we have to realize two elements of this heritage. And both of them should be better known, of course, in this country. I should like to suggest that we welcome a distinguished guest speaker. This distinguished guest speaker is a representative of the church, consecrated at 26 years of age, bishop at 38, archbishop and metropolitan of Krakow at 43, cardinal at 47. With this pace of promotion, one does not know when he will end. I should like to suggest that we welcome a distinguished guest speaker. This distinguished guest speaker is a representative of the church, consecrated at 26 years of age, bishop at 38, archbishop and metropolitan of Krakow at 43, cardinal at 47. With this pace of promotion, one does not know when he will end. And in those years and behind those promotions, there is full creative devotion to matters of faith. This was represented in his contribution to the Council, Vatican Council. It is represented in his work in various important congregations, and I unfortunately am not able to enumerate some of them, which would be definitely to our interest. He participated and participates in the Conference of Bishops. He is and has been friend and supporter of Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński, Primate of Poland. And the position of Primate of Poland historically is a little different than the position of a president of Bishops' Conference in the United States. In history, Primate in Poland was Viceroy. In the period of interregnum, when there was no ruler, Primate of Poland devised the direction for the nation. Primate of Poland is this center of orientation and guidance, which is extremely important in times of crisis, and it is hard to believe to the people of this country, but Eastern and Central Europe is in time of very deep crisis. I would say that we welcome a social activist, a man whose knowledge and sensitiveness to social problems is outstanding. Cardinal Wojtyla, when he was a student in Rome, started to continue the study of the Christian movement of young people, Jeunesse ouvrière catholique. And Cardinal Wojtyla grew in the atmosphere of struggle for social justice. And it's not without reason that he just delivered a conference at the Congress, Eucharistic Congress in Philadelphia, Eucharist and the Social Justice. I should like to suggest what Dr. Herman emphasized, that the third element which we should notice in introduction of our guest speaker is his scholarship. He earned his doctorate in 1948. He studied and prepared his thesis on the problem of faith according to St. John of Cross. I know that quite a lot of members of this distinguished assembly just recognize this interest of the church, which appeared in the recent times. For instance, the Serra Club studied the Dwyer's conference, which was concentrating on, of course, St. John of Cross. The second major thesis, the habilitation thesis, was the evaluation of possibilities to build Christian ethics on the basis of the system of Max Scheler. Very interesting for all groups of people, secular and not secular, religiously minded and not religiously minded. Whoever thinks this concern of modern world for ethics, which would be just a constructive force for the society which sometimes is collapsing without ethics, realizes that the perspectives of the scholarly interest of the cardinal are very broad. Cardinal Wojtyla published various studies. He became professor of Metropolitan Seminary in Krakow, and then of the Catholic University of Lublin, which I like to emphasize because it is my, of course, university also. And it is the only Catholic university from the Elbe River up to Japan. And it is good if people of free countries would remember that such a university exists. It is not supported by the government, and it works enormously, and it helps, of course, the church and human values, which are, of course, even broader than an interpretation of such values. We are fortunate, of course, to welcome a man who represents some kind of experience which also is perhaps foreign to many of this audience, namely that part of the world passed through terrible crisis, when the dignity of man, of human being, collapsed and was submitted to the authority of state once, to the one nation which was considered as the highest value. And in the name of this nation, it was possible to massacre 2,500 priests in Poland in concentration camps during the Nazi occupation. Cardinal Wojtyla was on special lists of SS. They were looking for him. But at the same time, he passed through difficult experience, which also is foreign to you, namely that instead of a nation and of a state, a party has been placed as the highest value. And in the name of this party also, the human values are degraded and are stepped upon, and the human values also are submitted to the decisions which, of course, represent the same crisis. I would say, therefore, that we are fortunate, and we have to think about this experience in order to draw, of course, conclusions from this type of encounter. We are fortunate and exceptionally honored to have such a lecturer among us, and this is my distinct privilege, pleasure, and honor to introduce to you His Eminence Karol Cardinal Wojtyla, who will speak on the intellectual work in the Catholic Church in Poland. His Eminence Cardinal Karol Wojtyla.
I suppose that these applauses could be better after my lecture. I am sure that my office, ecclesiastical office, is much more eminent as my English. But I suppose also that all distinguished guests of this lecture are also very indulgent. The first, I express my gratitude to the persons who spoke before me, and I express a special gratitude for this commemorative sign of the University of Wisconsin, Stephen Points. Thank you very much, Mr. Chancellor. As the subject of my lecture, I choose the theme Catholic learning in Poland today. I begin with the first point, some introductory informations. I am happy to take up within the context of today's meeting the topic Catholic learning in Poland, since the subject is in many respects very close to my heart. After studies in Krakow and Rome, I did postdoctoral work in the School of Theology at the Jagiellonian University in 1953. I was and still am connected with the philosophy department of the Catholic University of Lublin, but because of many episcopal obligations, I no longer am directly involved in supervising scholarly work there in the area of ethics, especially of anthropology. On the other hand, I am chairman of the Episcopal Commission for Catholic Learning, as well as chairman of the Educational Council of the Polish Episcopate. Each of these bodies has as its aim concern for the development of Catholic learning although each in a somewhat different way. The Commission is a working and service organ in relation to the Episcopal Conference in matters of Catholic learning in Poland, with particular consideration for institutions of higher learning of an academic character and also of major seminaries. On the other hand, the Educational Council, composed of the most competent professors and individuals in the field of Catholic learning, is above all a consultative organ. Frequently, it functions as an ecclesiastical commission for accreditation, as well as recognizing the degrees of autonomous specialist in foro ecclesiastico. In our situation, the existence of such an instrument is particularly important. The activity of the Commission for Catholic Learning and of the Episcopal Educational Council in Poland is recognized by the Apostolic See, that is, by the Congregation Pro Institutione Catholica, of which I am also a member. The affairs of Catholic academic institutions are of particular concern for this congregation, as recent documents give testimony, along with meetings of the congregation with representatives of universities and Catholic departments, that is, of academic institutions, as well as the preparation of a new constitution regulating their activity. A final word in this introduction is reserved for the organization which bears the title FIUC, Fédération Internationale des Universités Catholiques, the International Federation for the Catholic Universities. For our Polish academic institutions are also related with it. And several months ago, a meeting of the Presidium of FIUC was held in Lublin, as well as a separate meeting of the rectors of European Catholic institutions. So much for my introduction. Second point, a historical overview of institutions and structures of Catholic learning in Poland. I would like now to present some historical information which will at the same time lead us into the assets of contemporary Catholic learning in Poland, since it is a matter of institutions which serve it. A recently published multi-volumed work edited by Bishop Rechowicz, professor and former rector of the Catholic University of Lublin, under the title Historia Teologii w Polsce, the history of theology in Poland, points out all the facts and events in the field of Catholic learning in our country, which preceded the founding of the first Polish university in Kraków, 1364, as well as the first school of theology at that university, 1397. The first work generally considered to have been written by a Pole is Chronica Polonorum of Blessed Wincenty Kadlubek, Bishop of Kraków, my predecessor. And later, I am the 76th. And later, a monk at the Cistercian Abbey in Jędrzejów, died 1222. The founding of the Krakow University, and in turn the theology faculty, was undoubtedly a decisive factor for the further development of Catholic learning in Poland. And now, leaping over many centuries, I wish to state that the network of academic institutions which Poland and the Church in Poland possessed after gaining independence in 1918 was, to a large extent, inherited from the period of the pre-partitions of Poland in 18th century. It suffices to state that in addition to the oldest school of theology at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, a theology department likewise existed at the Stefan Batory University in Vilno. Also, at the John Casimir University in Lwów, as well as one at the University of Warsaw. The most important event, however, was the founding in Poland of the Catholic University of Lublin, and this precisely at the moment of the gaining of state independence in 1918. All these institutions have their own identity and history in the period between the First and Second World Wars. The theology department at the Jagiellonian University has a unique one. It contributed to the renewed foundation of Polish culture, Polish consciousness among the Polish priests from dioceses which were previously within the sphere of the three partitioning powers, Russia, Germany, and Austria. The period of the Second World War and the horrible occupation brought with it the closing of all institutions, all universities, all seminaries, the arrest of professors, their transfer to concentration camps, a bloody blow of several years' duration to the assets of the Polish clergy and of Polish theology, together with the entire nation and Polish culture. At the same time, the period of occupation brought with it a particular effort in the direction of ensuring the continuity of learning and of a university education in the form of underground studies. I myself was a student of the theology department at the underground Jagiellonian University during the occupation. Taking 2.5 years of such studies and working at the same time as industry worker. After the conclusion of the Second World War, the theology departments in Vilno and Lwów found themselves outside the boundaries of the Polish state. The theology departments of the Jagiellonian University in Krakow and the University of Warsaw began their activity immediately in 1945. And earlier than they, already in the fall of 1944, the Catholic University of Lublin. In 1954, the state authorities liquidated the theology departments in the state universities at Krakow and Warsaw, creating at the same time, independently without any coordination with the Holy See, with the Apostolic See, for only to her does this matter belong, a new state institution under the name of the Academy of Catholic Theology in Warsaw. Because of these circumstances, this institution is without canonical foundation. But the Archbishop of Warsaw, it is Cardinal Wyszyński, received from the Apostolic See special power to canonically sanction degrees awarded by the Academy. The liquidation of the theology department in Krakow placed this large area in a difficult situation. It is the largest in Poland, and the highest number of students of theology is still in Krakow. In order to circumvent this difficult situation, the Apostolic See issued a decree on the strength of which the ancient Krakowian School of Theology, founded already in 1397, thanks to the efforts of the Blessed Queen Jadwiga, exists hitherto in the ecclesiastical sense, and this is as the Papal Theology School, remaining exclusively under the authority of the Church. The question of the Krakowian department is a continually lively one for both the clergy and the Catholic Society of Krakow, as well as the entire episcopate, approach to the state authorities for the reparation of the wrong committed by the liquidation of the deserving School of Theology of the Jagiellonian University. The question of the Krakowian Department of Theology became likewise the point of departure for new enterprises in the field of Catholic learning on the part of the Conference of the Polish Episcopate. For if during the interwar period the Church in Poland had 5 academic institutions for the education of the clergy, so in the present situation it needs at least this same number of centers for this purpose. For this reason, in addition to Lublin, Warsaw, and Kraków, such centers were organized in Wrocław and in Poznań. In Wrocław, the theology department was active at the university during the Prussian partition. In Poznań, we had the old school of Lubrański. A plan was prepared for a theology department at the State University of Adam Mickiewicz after the gaining of independence in 1918. But the creation of this department did not come to realization. Presently it functions as a purely ecclesiastical institution. As a result, five Catholic academic centers exist in Poland, but not all with the accordance of the state. Lublin with the Catholic University, Warsaw with the State Academy of Catholic Theology. We also have in Warsaw the parallel Christian Theological Academy, as well as the papal schools of theology in Kraków, Wrocław, and Poznań. A similar school of theology under the name Academic Theological Studium exists likewise in Warsaw, independently of the Academy of Catholic Theology. It is recognized by the Apostolic See as an ecclesiastical continuation of the theology department of the University of Warsaw. So in Warsaw the situation is the most complicated. Our major seminaries are in contact with these centers. According to the plan coordinated with the Congregation of the Holy See, Pro Institutione Cattolica, the major seminaries enter into agreements for scholarly cooperation with these academic ecclesiastical institutions. These arrangements make possible the acquisition of basic academic degrees, Master of Theology, by the graduates of our major seminaries under specified conditions. The Commission for Catholic Learning oversees these affairs. I must add that the number of seminaries in Poland corresponds more or less to the number of dioceses. Even the small diocese of Drohyczyn, the rest of Pinsk, has its own seminary. Only the rest of the Archdiocese of Lwów doesn't have. In Lubaczów, the seminaries or religious orders and of male congregations constitute a second group. The total number of seminaries for the education and formation of the clergy is approximately 60. A special task is the formation and theological education of sisters. It is also accomplished by some special institutes. For instance, in Krakow, the Higher Institute for Catechetic Formation of Sisters, connected with the theological school, the School of Theology in Krakow. Many seminaries stand very high in the field of learning. Among the professors, there are at least several so-called autonomous scholars, docent, that is, those having undergone postdoctoral work. Some seminaries have a magnificent publication record. Professors and lecturers who work in the mentioned institutions work in disciplines peculiar to the particular institution. These educators belong to special association or section of learning. These sections have scholarly conferences at least once a year. Some biblical scholars, for example, organize their own congresses. Once every 5 years, a Congress of Polish Theology is held. One will be held in Kraków in September of this year. I must return quickly to be there. The theme of this Congress is Theology, the Study of God. In 1971, the Congress held in Lublin considered the topic Theology and Anthropology. In 1966, Polish millennium, the Congress, also in Lublin, considered the influence of Vatican II on theology. From a review of the activity of sections and the study of various publications, one can see a definite characteristic of contemporary Catholic learning in Poland. I will deal, for example, with 3 fields which are developing very intensively, perhaps more so than during the interwar period. These are history, philosophy, and biblical studies. When I speak of history as a field of Catholic learning, I have in mind primarily the history of the Church in Poland, which is at the same time a big chapter in the history of the Polish nation and of the Polish state. In this field, we have many works, research, projects, publications, and group initiatives, as for example, the Institute of the Historical Geography of the Church in Poland at the Catholic University of Lublin. We have monographs and works which represent syntheses. Our scholars also took part in last year's World Congress of Historians at San Francisco. This development of the interests and of the achievements of Catholic learning in the field of history has its basic justification in the fact that history is a need of a people when it finds itself living in difficult and critical periods. In such periods, Poles come to an understanding of their identity on the basis of their past. This is grounded in the specific national instinct, which does not allow for the approbation of a single falsification of own history, but which very resolutely seeks truth in this domain. This explains why a great need exists in the history of the Polish nation for the history of the Church. A distinct problem for historians became, in the last years, the question of the so-called regained territories, both western and northern, namely Wrocław, Szczecin, Gdańsk, and Warmia. I must note that the ecclesiastical structures on these lands are Polish in their origin. Suffice it to say that the bishopcy of Wrocław belonged to the Metropolitan of Gniezno from 1000 to 1821. The second field, which takes on a particular meaning against the background of the contemporary worldwide situation, is philosophy. Marxism is the official philosophy of the present Polish government. Polish philosophical traditions of the last century, in particular, are characterized on the one hand by a tie with positivism, the Lwów-Warsaw School, and on the other with phenomenology, whose representative of the highest class was Roman Ingarden, Lwów-Kraków. Catholic philosophy develops in relationship to all these trends. It has its own traditional Aristotelian Thomistic profile. Added to it are the methodological aspects of the school of Polish logicians, such as Łukasiewicz, Tarski, and Ajdukiewicz. Polish Catholic philosophy also takes much from phenomenology. We observe all these orientations in Lublin, such professors as Kamiński, Krąpiec, Stępień, Styczeń, in Kraków, such as Jaworski, Stróżewski, Tischner. Though one cannot speak of a formal dialogue with Marxism, a formal dialogue doesn't exist. One can note in the writings of Polish Catholic philosophers a systematic handling of problems posed by Marxist philosophy, a pointing out of gaps, and a presentation of solutions, such names of Professor Kusak, Ślipko. Such a route leads to a deeper justification of the truth of the Catholic worldview. Philosophy plays a basic role here, whence its development and vitality. A special word deserves to be said about the research and discoveries in the field of the history of philosophy, especially Polish medieval philosophy. Research began during the interwar period by such scholars as the famous Konstanty Michalski, and has found such successors as Professor Świeżawski and others. Polish theology has strong ties with the speculative tradition of the Western theology. For instance, Professor Różycki. It is also very sensitive to the currents of reinterpretation. It seems, however, that Polish theology manifests great reserve against so many Western publications and a correct relationship to the teaching of the Church, to the magisterium. A good sense. Deserving special attention is the great development of biblical studies. Perhaps never before did Poland have so many biblical scholars as now, and so many who underwent a reliable European schooling in biblical studies. This is apparent in many publications and in some kind of systematic process of biblifying entire theological learning. Biblical scholars of the Polish millennium translated the Holy Scriptures into Polish from the original languages. This is known as the Biblia Tyniecka, the Bible of Tyniec, Jankowski, Romaniuk, Kudasiewicz. The edition house of Palotinum in Poznań publishes introductions and commentaries to the individual books of the Bible. All that has been said about the state of contemporary Catholic learning in Poland in a way exhausts the topic. It is barely an attempt to point out certain, perhaps very characteristic features. Point 4, concluding characteristics. A Catholic learning in Poland, as has been seen, is a reality, and in no way a remnant. It is an authentic continuity of previous phases of development. It also attempts to be part of the current of the contemporary life of the Church and of the life of its own society. It has at its disposal a certain core and workshop. One cannot say that this current workshop is adequate, but it is there. We are doing all we can to prevent ourselves from becoming marginal. We are doing all we can to prevent the further reduction of necessary needs. And such tendencies exist. They flow out of the assumptions of an atheistic system according to which religion in the new government ought to disappear. And if religion, then also theology and Catholic learning in general. The Church, from the nature of things, must oppose these tendencies. This explains the postulate of the 5 main academic centers mentioned before. Catholic learning in Poland, like all Catholic culture, demands the rights of citizenship in the life of our society. It does not want to be some kind of a marginal phenomenon. It does not want to be confined to circles of professionals only, that is, of the clergy. Now, the Church in Poland looks upon the education of the clergy as fundamental. The Church also considers the academic status of clergy a fundamental issue. That means social rights flowing out of completed higher studies, academic studies. Catholic learning in Poland also asks that it be allowed to have a real influence on the form of the entire present and future Polish culture. And here, our call and our workshop is decidedly insufficient. The one and only department of humanities, and this is numerically a meager one, is at the Catholic University of Lublin. We need more departments of secular studies. Even the old department of social sciences at the Catholic University of Lublin was liquidated after 1945. This is a very serious problem. It is a matter of forming a Catholic intelligentsia. We do the best we can through pastoral work among students and the university, as well as among the university and professional intelligentsia. This is hardly a direct method. Another lack we feel in the field of Catholic learning in Poland is the insufficient opportunity to be known outside of Poland. The works of non-Polish theologians and philosophers are known to Poles, but Polish theology and philosophy is very little known outside Poland. A foreign market is not necessary for the development of these sciences in Poland, but it is nevertheless a lack. I think that the Polish-American community could help in this respect. The aim of learning is the solid cognition of truths in every field. Catholic learning, through the realization of this aim, serves to deepen the human and Christian consciousness. The attainment of this aim is dependent of didactics, on teaching, on the transmission of knowledge. The Church in Poland is doing all it can to fulfill this function at various levels. In this paper, I have concentrated above all on learning at the university level. The problem of teaching is greater. It embraces the elementary and junior high levels. It also embraces, in some kind of sense, the post-university period, the education of adults. Under this aspect, the core and workshop of learning and of Catholic teaching is decidedly insufficient. It is not commensurate with the needs and the rights of Catholic society in Poland, which constitutes more than 90% of the citizens. Schools at all levels are almost entirely state schools. They were fully secularized. The study of religion and all religious externals were removed from them. The realization of this fact permits us to better understand how responsible and difficult are the tasks of Catholic learning in Poland. These tasks are an organic part of the Church's mission in Poland. One can look at the entirety of the mission, of this mission, from a number of different viewpoints. If we could fuse all these viewpoints into a whole, we would get a broad picture of the life of Catholic nation in this new and difficult segment of its history. Let the segment analyzed here by me in a less than detailed fashion permit us to look at the entirety in at least some kind of measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Cardinal Wojtyla, for your inspirational information and enlightenment about the health of the church in Poland. It's good to get a report that God is alive and well over there. Before we come to the closing of this, I just had a few things handed to me. Some more people in the audience. We have Mrs. and Dr. Justice Paul, Chairman of the History Department here at the University. Wherever you are. I don't know before if I announced Dr. Woodka. Did I announce him before? Dean of the College of Letters and Sciences. And we have Mr. and Mrs. Leonard Petrusky, who have worked quite a bit with the organization of this get-together. We have a round of applause for them. At this time, too, I mentioned earlier that there were many people responsible for the planning of this event, and names cannot be given because of the shortness of time. However, at this time, I would like all of those people, and I only met them a week ago, probably just a handful of them, who were in the planning and preparation of this occasion. The people who had to sell tickets, those who had to get in contact with various building people to get facilities to accommodate our crowd, and those who helped in any way. If you would all stand up, please, just to give this audience a view of how many people worked to put this on for you. They're all bashful. Trees, Grace. Okay, before the benediction, a few closing remarks I have is that They hinge on the importance of religion. It is said that most of us don't know how bad off we would be if it were not for religion. We should be like the little boy who was saying his prayers and concluded, God bless Mommy, Daddy, sister, brother, Grandma, Grandpa, Auntie Emma, and Uncle John. And please, God, take care of yourself, or else we're all sunk. It has been my pleasure to be with you this evening, and there is just one announcement to be made about the Mass at Spash. We are asked to use the west side parking lot. West. At this time, then, I will call upon Father Mieczkowski to deliver the benediction. Father Steve.
Almighty and merciful God, in whose benevolent hands lie the destinies of nations and men, we suppliantly yet confidently invoke thy divine blessing upon this assemblage of God-fearing and humanity-loving men and women from many walks of life. We thank thee, Heavenly Master, for the countless favors and blessings bestowed upon us in the past, and particularly the cherished privilege extended to us on this day to attend and participate in the convocation, reception, and banquet in honor of His Eminence, Cardinal Karol Wojtyla, Archbishop of Krakow, Poland, and especially to be present and participate in the sublime liturgy of the sacrifice of the Mass, oftentimes called Eucharistic celebration, to be enacted this evening by His Eminence in the auditorium of Stevens Point Area High School. All of us deeply appreciate the great honor we are enjoying because of the visit of a cardinal from Europe. Unfortunately, genuine gratitude cannot be expressed in a simple few words. We entreat thee, O Lord of infinite power and goodness, to bless and bless abundantly His Eminence Cardinal Wojtyla, now and in the days to come. Bless, too, in no lesser measure, His Excellency Bishop Recking of La Crosse, the committee members, the distinguished guests, the venerable sisters, the venerable brothers, the reverend clergy in attendance and participation, the speakers, the officers and officials at all levels and in all categories, the personnel involved in transportation, accommodations, and communications, the directors, supervisors, and performers in any capacity, the musicians and singers at all functions, the members of food staff and service in all localities, the many, many participants and attendants who are contributing so much to the gratifying success of this outstanding event, which every one of us will never forget. We certainly wish to apologize for any omissions and assure you that said omissions, if any, are entirely unintentional. Now, with your gracious indulgence, ladies and gentlemen, let us digress for a moment from our local situation. Our distinguished Cardinal Wojtyla is scheduled to depart for his country, Poland, tomorrow. We sincerely wish him bon voyage and happy landing. However, if it is within the prerogatives of your benediction homilist, it would be my distinct honor to extend an invitation to His Eminence Cardinal Wojtyla to return to our great community for another visit in not too distant future. But today it is our earnest hope and fervent prayer that he would come as a representative of a free country and a free people. Whatever the future holds for us, for that great cause, we do not know today. We urge you and appeal to you and plead with you, dear friends, to pledge His Eminence your support for God's plan for every nation and for all peoples. May the blessing of Almighty God, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit descend upon us today and remain with you always. Amen.